Hey, what's up, everybody? I'm David Grubb, and welcome to another edition of the Post Up with David Grubb right here on Boot Crew Media. Glad to have you with me on this Thursday as we talk about the New Orleans Pelicans and we get closer to the start of training camp. And this is the toughest part of the year between waiting for things to just happen, after summer league. And as we've talked about before, just hoping for some actual basketball in the near future, and the anticipation continues to build. I just want to give a shout out to Task, our new sponsor. You see them up in the top right corner there. These things, they're comfortable, they're breathable. Nobody asked me to say this, by the way. I'm just saying it on my own volition. Really comfortable, really breathable. Great for being outside in this New Orleans heat. If you're just chilling, or if you're out working out, you're out running, whatever. These are great performance wear items. So check out Task if you get the opportunity, and get you some really good sports gear. The ESPN NBA predictions for this NBA season are out, as far as what the records of teams they have. And the New Orleans Pelicans find themselves at the bottom 5 of ESPN's Western Conference rankings, 14th overall, with a prediction of 26 wins. 26 wins. So the big questions they have about the Pelicans are Zion Williamson's health, of course, and the bench, I think, is a concern relative to what ESPN's expectations are. But I think it's shocking that they would have the Pelicans at 26 wins. And I think the consensus is there's no way that a roster with the talent that the Pelicans do have, and yes, they have holes, and yes, they have mismatched pieces at places in the roster, and question marks, to be sure, for players coming off of injuries and trying to build chemistry with a very much overhauled lineup. You know how many new players the Pelicans have added in this offseason. When you talk about 2 new rookies, Jordan Poole, Kevon Looney, you're adding 4 players right there into your main rotation. Sadiq Bey makes 5. And then you talk about Micah Peavy and Jalen McDaniels. So that puts you up to 7 new players. More than half your roster has turned over from a year ago. And so now when you look at the Pelicans, I think when you see the other teams that are in the bottom 5, the other team that I think is surprising in that group would be the Portland Trailblazers, who are listed at 11th and expected to have 39 wins. The Kings, the Pelicans, I believe, are better than the Kings. The Kings are an aging team that doesn't really know what it wants to be. I think that they have some talent, but I don't think that they are a particularly good team. The same with the Phoenix Suns, who are built with just a bunch of guards, it appears at this point. Not a lot of experience at the center position. Some talent there, but very young, and not a lot of size on the wings. So it should be a difficult season for the Suns. Of course, the Jazz are expected to be the worst team in the West once again. But I think the Pelicans should be considered as part of that play-in group that ESPN has with Golden State, Dallas, San Antonio, and Memphis. I think the Pelicans should be in that group. If the Warriors are expected to win 48 games and the Mavericks and Spurs both 44 and the Grizzlies 42, I've said that I think the Pelicans are between a 36 and 43 win team. If they were to get 36 wins, that puts them somewhere in the range of 13th in the conference. I think if they get to 43 wins, obviously, I think that puts them firmly in the top 10. I would believe that the Pelicans are far more close to a top 10 team in the West than to a bottom 5 team in the West, though it could happen that they fall into the bottom 5 due to the gradation of the conference. You could have teams at 11, 12, or 13 that are still relatively even with 7 through 10, based on what we've seen in the Western Conference the last several seasons. There hasn't been much of a separation between teams in about the 6th spot to anywhere around 12, unless those teams at the end of the season decide that they don't want to chase a play-in berth. Well, the New Orleans Pelicans absolutely will be chasing a play-in bid this year at the very minimum, because they know what the stakes are for this franchise. They know that they have to appear in the postseason this season, and Joe Dumars this may not be, and I would imagine it will not be, the group that finishes the season. I think that Joe Dumars is very serious about building a winner and building at least a very competitive team in his first year. If the Pelicans are not going to be a top 5 team in the West, and I don't think that they will, when you think about Oklahoma City, Houston, Denver, Minnesota, the Clippers, and potentially the Lakers, based on, what we've seen out of Luka Doncic in the past. I think when you look at those teams, what you know that they've made some major changes to their rosters over the last year or so in order to remain competitive. Now, Joe Dumars brought in players to fill the gaps this offseason to make this team a complete team and make it a younger team, make it more suitable to the style of play that he wants to implement. The next wave of that will be how these players gel. And you know that there are guys on the block. I think Jose Alvarado ultimately is somebody that Joe Dumars would put on the block as somebody who could bring you some assets, maybe just draft capital, a second rounder, a couple of second rounders, and maybe a player as well. If you can get that out of Jose Alvarado to clear up playing time for Jeremiah Fears, if Fears exceeds expectations and picks up the NBA game a little bit early and you want to clear up those minutes for him, then certainly Jose Alvarado would be a trade target. I believe Carlo Makovic could be a trade target, though Carlo has upside if he can get there just may not be the minutes for him in the Pelicans rotation. When you look at the top 10, Carlo doesn't fit into that group, though you want him to. Certainly you'd like to see his game continue to progress. There are no guaranteed minutes for Carlo in the current stage of this team. I think there will be teams out there who'd be interested in him as an asset, whether as an individual player or packaged in another group. Certainly Jordan Hawkins falls into that category as well, as someone who needs to prove their value, or Joe Dumars will likely ship him out. So when you look at those 3 guys, and then you also have to look at Kevon Looney, that if he doesn't perform at a high level, or if Yves Missi again exceeds the expectations for himself in year 2, if Missi can become that type of player where there is no doubt that he should be starting for the Pelicans on a nightly basis, if he improves his defense to the level that he becomes a stopper on the back line, then Kevon Looney, who has an attractive contract for other teams because he has a team option for next season, not a player option. So even if a team decides that they wanted a veteran big to take them into the playoffs to be part of their rotation, they don't have to take on a lot in return. And the Pelicans can use that contract ultimately as some leverage, again, to try to get draft capital, which is what I would do if I'm the Pelicans this season. Player talent doesn't mean as much to me as getting some draft capital for next season. And I know folks continue to say, why are you so concerned about next year's draft? It's because this next year's draft, and I know it's looking ahead, but when the class has the kind of depth that next year's have and the kind of height and athleticism that next year's class is projected to have, I think you want to have a swing at that and have the opportunity to get some of that talent, particularly when you know that height and athleticism are areas where you need to continue to stockpile some of those players. So I think when you look at the Pelicans and these early season predictions, they're based primarily off of the doubt that this team can stay healthy. And if you saw Trey Murphy's comments about what he's looking forward to this season, proving doubters wrong, making an all-star team, winning, getting to the playoffs. He mentioned winning first. Let me just make sure I'm clear about that. The first thing he talked about was winning games, getting to the playoffs, and then his personal goals of being an all-star. And then I think it's a team and a personal goal to prove people who doubt him and his ability both return at the same level he was playing at last year and his ability to elevate his game further. The same, I think, can be said for what we've heard via Joe Dumars about Zion Williamson this offseason. You know for a fact that Herb Jones is in the gym working out and getting better. I think that you could say the same for the new pickups. I would imagine that Kevon Looney is in great shape right now. He's always been a guy who has to be physically imposing because he doesn't have the height that other centers may have. I think Jordan Poole knows that his reputation is in some ways on the line, that people look at him as a guy over the last 2 years as a diminished player from what his role was in Golden State, fairly or unfairly. He didn't ask to get traded to Washington. He was sent to Washington. He didn't ask to be part of a losing organization and a losing culture for the last 2 years that was seeking more long-term gains than short-term opportunities. That's not on him. The minutes that he's only played the last couple of seasons, staying below 30 minutes on a team that, again, wasn't trying to win, that's not on him. So And it's not his fault that he's coming now into an organization that does not have a true lead guard, putting more of the ball handling pressure on him. So there's some adapting that he's going to have to do to his game. And I understand where the criticisms come from. Though I don't understand, and let me say this really quick, I don't understand the amount of criticism I'm getting in my comments about what I'm saying about Jordan Poole. Like, people are saying I'm being hard on Jordan Poole. And I know I don't need to address this stuff, but it just sometimes I get just completely confused by the comments that I see, because I don't think people are listening to the entire thing that I'm saying. And I don't think I've been very negative about Jordan Poole, but there are concerns, just like there are concerns for Zion Williamson, just like there are concerns for Trey, just like there are concerns for Herb. There are concerns for every player on this team. And I think it's a disservice to you as an audience if I don't mention both the positives and the negatives. Like I said, there are people who do a really good job of being super upbeat about the team every day. There are a lot of people who do a great job on those things. And I think that that's an important part in servicing fans, because fans first and foremost want to feel positive about their teams. They want to be rallied around their local teams, and they want to feel good about being a fan. They don't want to hear doom and gloom every day. I've had talks with other media people, and we said we wouldn't do this if it made you upset every day. It just wouldn't be fun. And it's not something you want to walk into your life and do something that makes you miserable every day. But my responsibility as somebody who was trained as a journalist, as somebody who's been covering this team for a decade, who's covered pretty much anything that keeps a score in my career. I made a choice a long time ago. When you get into this industry, you get to decide, do you want to be a journalist or do you want to be a personality? And everybody gravitates toward personality because that's easy. It's easy to have an opinion on everything that happens. It's a lot harder to do your research, to come up with a conclusion based on facts and data, and to put yourself out there and just simply say, this is what I think. This is what I think, not what I know. This is what I think. I'm not afraid to be wrong. I have been wrong. I'll be wrong again. I'll be wrong in really bad ways going forward. That's life. But I do not understand when people, it's one thing to not agree with my argument. It's another thing to not understand it. And it's another thing to be openly hostile when you ain't got to be. So let's turn the tone down on that. If you got questions, if you disagree with me, I love hearing about it. But this idea that I have something against any player on this roster, that I think that they're failures, look, I'm evaluating their basketball. I don't know these people as far as like personal relationships. I know them from seeing them in the arena and talking to them about basketball, but I'm not here to insult any of these guys. I'm here to talk about the basketball. And sometimes I'm going to get it right, and sometimes I'm going to get it wrong. But I'm always going to give you my informed opinion. And I'm going to continue to do the research and continue to look between the lines as best I can. That's the only thing I can promise you. I can't promise you 100% accuracy. I'm not a soothsayer nor a fortune teller. I'm just a man. So I'm going to continue to do my best with that. But the Pelicans have earned some praise from different outlets now. They are getting some reprieve on how bad people viewed them as a team. I think that you're starting to see some of the other media groups now starting to come around a little bit on the things that they've done this offseason. Sites like Hoops Rumors, like and a few others have been talking about the Pelicans and noticing again that I think that they have some talent and that they have the potential of really developing this team into something. I think that there has to be an understanding of what are the Pelicans building. And I think that we understand conceptually what they're building, but it's going to take time. As I said in the last segment, there are things that are still going to change dramatically, I think, over the next season, because Joe Dumars couldn't do everything in one off season. You can't fix everything in a few months. He needs to see some of these things on the court in order to make a real evaluation. When you come off of a tenure where you only got 2 winning seasons in 6, so 1 out of every 3 seasons was a positive season, and 2 of those, came in the last 4 years. Both of those came in the last 4 years. You have to get a complete restructuring, and you have to stop shooting for mediocrity. You know, you've heard this plenty of times that the worst place to be in the NBA is mediocre, because you can't get picks that are good enough when you're at the bottom, and you can't get into a position to win against the teams at the top. I'm not as worried about Joe Dumars as other people have been, and I think that there are folks who are coming around to it. Again, I think the worries would be if he's too hasty in making some decisions. That doesn't seem to be his mode with the core of this team. It seems he has decided what the core is, and what he's looking for are those pieces that fit around the edge. I think the big question will be, and what the Pelicans have received praise for, is not losing some of their young talent, is not going out and giving away a Trey Murphy or giving away a Herb Jones, because it could have been expeditious to do so, because there is this pressure from the league to rebuild. The big thing will be, and we'll talk about the draft reviews in a second, that are starting to change a bit, is what are the ultimate paths for Jeremiah Fears and Derek Queen? Because if you're anticipating that both of those guys can be cornerstones in your starting five, we know that Herb Jones now is going to be 27 years old. We know that Trey Murphy's about to be 25. Zion's about to be 25. And for Fears, who's about to turn 19, but is currently 18, you know, and then, of course, for Queen, who's about to turn 21, that's a 4 to 5 year difference for each of these guys, 4 to 6 years, depending on which one, difference between them and the three primary members of the Pelicans core. How long? And then you put Jordan Poole's age, who I think is about to turn 27 as well. When you put those players together, will Fears be able to assume the starting point guard role and not just be the starter, but be a winning starter at point guard by the time he's 20, which would be either mid to late season 2? You know, is he going to make that jump by then? And is Derek Queen going to become a guy who can start at center for you in that same span? If those two things happen, then you have a very clear path to what the rest of the team is going to do. Because I think if both of those guys are in your starting lineup, you have an electric point guard, you have a center who can pass the basketball and score in a variety of ways. You'd have Zion Williamson and his dynamic ability to get to the basket. You'd have Trey Murphy and his ability to shoot the three. And then you'd have Herb Jones as a connecting piece and a guy who could knock down standalone jumpers and cut off of screens and score that way. You'd have a very strong starting lineup. You know, what does that mean for Jordan Poole in 2 years? Have you signed him to an extension? And if so, does that mean that Jordan Poole now, it's necessary for him to move to the bench and be your sixth man, which I think is a possibility. But if you're paying him $30+ million, you're not paying him as a sixth man. You're counting him really as a fifth starter, and you'd have to play him starter level minutes. That is certainly doable, but I'm just saying, you know, those are the things down the road. And the biggest thing is going to be the path to the starting lineup for those two rookies. Because if you fail and you decide that you're trying to build around the two of them, then I think that they're the only two on this roster right now that if you're going to get rid of everybody else, because you'd have to get rid of the older players, if you decide that they are the two cornerstones and not pieces along with your other guys, if you decide that you want to build around Fears and Queen immediately, then everybody goes. And I think you have to, as the Pelican, you start thinking about a longer amount of time before becoming a contending team. Your stars typically have to be in the early parts of their prime or in the middle of it, which means you won't get that out of a Fears and Queen for a couple of years. If they are solid supplementary pieces to the other four guys that we're talking about mostly, as they get into a chance to compete for a championship, if they can get that in the next 2 seasons, then I think what you have is what could be a very formidable Pelicans team that would just need a few moves on the bench to make sure that it stays competitive, because you'd still have if your Derek Queen is your starter, and you still have Yves Missi, or if you've traded Missi for a veteran or whatever has been done, I think you could really work on a quality bench having those two guys doing well on their rookie contracts. You have a lot more money involved because you haven't had to hit their extensions. If we're waiting till after their extensions hit for this team to become a winner, then that's the time that means that probably Zion Williamson and Trey Murphy are gone. I think Herb Jones stays regardless for the most part because I think the Pelicans, view him as somebody that they don't have to overpay going forward, and he means as much to the culture in that regard. Can be that Udonis Haslem type, the guy who's here for the duration of his career and sets the tone. I think that that's something that is a realistic possibility. Working alongside Joe Dumars in that regard for Herb Jones. But I think ultimately, it's about the primes of your young players and the primes of your current core. And do those things. Can you be a supplemental player very quickly for those players? The draft reviews, as we talk about those young players, have started to improve. And I think that the biggest part of that right now is Jeremiah Fears, that people have a lot of hope that Fears is going to become an elite young point guard. I certainly think it's possible. I mean, we've talked about this, and Jeremiah Fears and Trey Murphy, to me, present themselves as franchise players. They walk the walk. They have the appearance. They sound like that when you listen to them speak to the media. And that's important to have more than one player who certainly views themselves as an elite in this league. The Pelicans have 3 players who view themselves as potentially being elite difference makers in this league. When you talk about Zion, Trey, and now Jeremiah Fears. Derek Queen certainly has the confidence, but I think it's, just watching the two, it's clear to me that Fears is a bit more mature than Queen at this stage. Queen still feels very much like a kid, like a young man growing up, whereas it seems as if Jeremiah Fears has adopted the role of being a professional basketball player even before he got to Oklahoma. The understanding for him in classing up and then going to Oklahoma and doing what he did in his freshman year, I think for him, he views it as a matter of time before he's great. I think the approach for Derek Queen, and it doesn't mean he'll be less successful, but I think the approach for Derek Queen is he has something to prove in order to be great. That can certainly work when you have a chip on your shoulder and it can drive you. But I think there's a difference between the calm kind of confidence of a Jeremiah Fears, not cockiness. I don't see cockiness in Jeremiah Fears, though there's nothing wrong with a certain level of cockiness. But I think when you look at Fears, what you get more than not is a quiet confidence. And I think with Queen, you have the chip on your shoulder. I think that's appropriate for both positions. I want my point guard to be quietly confident. I don't need my point guard to be a loud individual. I need them to be someone who rallies the troops. I need them to be someone who holds people accountable. I need them to be someone who demands command of the basketball when they're on the floor and knows what everybody else's responsibilities are and takes care of those. I need my center to be a force of dominance inside. And if Derek Queen is going to be that kind of guy, if he's going to attack the opposing center every night, if he's going to put that person in the position where they've got to defend him on every possession, they were worried about him getting his position early in the shot clock. They're worried about his ability to shoot the basketball. They're worried about his ability to put it on the floor, and you're keeping defenses on edge, then Derek Queen can be an exceptional player in this league. But you got to be patient. So as we look at the Pelicans, and I think that the people will come around on the draft, but I think the thing that holds the Pelicans back is going to be until people see that the record justifies the move. And I said this when Derek Queen was drafted. I don't think anything in year one that Derek Queen can do will justify taking him with that 13th pick. That doesn't mean that there's something wrong with doing it. But in year one, I think it's unfair to Derek Queen to ask him in one season to prove that he was worth the 13th pick. We shall see. We give him the ability to prove either the pundits or Joe Dumars' faith right. It's going to take some time. So I think that when you look at both of their futures, they can be very bright. And I think that it'll take some time, and the Pelicans have to win in order for these players to get the kind of recognition that they deserve. But again, it's a double-edged sword, particularly for Jeremiah Fears, in that if a rookie point guard is playing a lot, you're probably not winning. If an 18-year-old is getting a good share of minutes, you're probably not winning. If he gets those minutes because he earned them, fantastic. And I would look forward to seeing it, because we all, I think, agree that the Pelicans have needed a point guard, someone who could break people down off the dribble consistently, create and be the focal point of driving the offense. They've been looking for that since Rajon Rondo. And maybe they have that now. Maybe not today. Maybe not by December. Maybe not even by this year's playoffs. But they could have the first franchise point guard that they've had really since Chris Paul left. And that, to me, is really exciting to find out what that's going to be. I'm just sick and tired, though, of the trade rumors. And I'm going to just say that again. I'm so really tired of the trade rumors. And I hope that they go away soon. Let's see what else. The Pelicans lost one of their backups real quickly. Kyler Kelly, who played, briefly for the Pelicans last season, has signed with the Los Angeles Lakers. I guess the Lakers are just signing every former Pelicans center they can find. They got Jackson Hayes. They have Kyler Kelly. They had what's his name, Trey Jemison. So I guess the Lakers are just signing every Pelican center they can find. They had DeMarcus Cousins. They had Anthony Davis. They didn't have DeMarcus Cousins, did they? I don't know. I can't remember it now. Boogie played for so many teams before finally going down to Puerto Rico. But that doesn't really matter. And as we look at the Pelicans depth chart now, you start with Jordan Poole, Herb Jones, Trey Murphy, Zion. I still think Looney will start, with Messi playing the majority of minutes, but I think Looney will start today. And then on the bench, Jose, Jeremiah Fears, Kevon Looney, Sadiq Bey, and then could be Jared Springer. It could be one of these other guys that you signed. It could be Carlo. We will find out with that. We'll see what the depth chart looks like. We'll see what that turns into once we get to training camp. But I think that's going to be something to watch really, really closely, to see how Willie Green decides to round out these minutes and see if a guy like a Trey Alexander or Bryce McGowan can work their way in, which of course, would make things a lot more tenuous for Jordan Hawkins if one of those guys outplays him during camp. I think the Pelicans really need Jordan Hawkins to kind of show up, right? Moving on to the Pelicans and their 2K ratings. And 2K is full of criticisms every year, and they should be, because they haven't really done the game right in a number of years. But the Pelicans picks for the starters, the numbers that they got generally are fine, but the two they get wrong: Zion Williamson given an 87 overall, and I think that some of the ratings have Zion just a 93 in dunking. Like, that's what we doing? Is Zion just a 93? I think Zion is probably a player, like, when you talk about it, he should be at least a 90, right? Like, for his overall rating in 2K, Zion should be at least a 90. I think having him at an 87 is a bit low, even if with the injuries, because we're not talking about injuries as a overall skill in 2K. I know durability is on there and whatnot, but for Zion Williamson, just his overall talent level, I think putting him a little low. I mean, guys like Anthony Edwards, guys like Ja Morant got into that 90 range, and Zion didn't. I think that's surprising. Ja's missed plenty of games, to over the last couple seasons. So would you say that Zion is less talented than Ja? And I love Ja Morant, but I don't think he's more talented than Zion. So I think that those should be closer. And then for Trey to be an 82, that makes him just an okay starter, right? As an 82, I think Trey should probably be a little bit higher, maybe an 85 or an 86. Not a 90, of course, but I think Trey should probably be a couple points higher as well, because Trey's lower than Jordan Poole. And again, not to disrespect Jordan Poole at all, but I think Trey is a little bit better than Jordan. And I know folks will go back and talk about his Golden State days, but that's not what these ratings are based on. They're based on who you are today. And I think last year, Trey showed that he's a player who can do a lot of things on the offensive end, and he's improving on the defensive end. The good thing about this, of course, is that these will get adjusted during the season, and we'll see those scores change. Finally, I just wanted to hit on this real quick. There were 3 questions put up about the Pelicans, and I think these were, questions that I've asked, and I think for the biggest part are pretty easy to answer. But the number one is, can Zion Williamson stay healthy? Who knows? I hope so, but who knows? I think it's at this stage, you're just waiting to find out. I think it's unfair for anybody at this point to project how many games Zion is going to play, because we've done it and we failed at it many, many times. Can Jordan Poole play winning basketball again? That's been a question. Is that we know he's a very talented player, but you do pick up bad habits on bad teams, and he didn't have to really be an initiator. And so we'll see. Can he operate in that primary initiator role, and can he be really efficient? He has been at times as the 3rd or 4th option, and in the primary bench scorer in Golden State. But now on a team that has expectations of winning and giving the starting role, a role that he's never played before as the lead facilitator for a team, that will be the interesting part of his evolution as a player. And then finally, who's not cracking the rotation? We've talked about that as to which players on the team could find themselves on the outside looking in. And I think you have so many guards and forwards on this team, and then you have a limited number of centers, but you also have a limited number of minutes at that center position because of how many forwards you have who can play small ball for you in different situations. So I think the guys who are most in danger of trying to find minutes early are Carlo Makovich and Jeremiah Fears. It's going to be really hard for those 2 guys to get on the floor early on. And I know that's disappointing to a lot of people. But again, when you go look at the rotation and you look at who's getting minutes at the point guard spot, it's going to be a lot of Jordan Poole minutes. It's going to be a lot of Jose Alvarado minutes. That doesn't leave a lot of minutes for Jeremiah Fears. And then if DeJounte Murray comes back, I don't leave a lot of minutes for Jeremiah Fears. So I think that's the difficulty for him. And like I said, with Carlo, between Kevon, Misi, and whenever Queen gets back, if he's ready to go by the start of the regular season, there's just not a lot of minutes there for Carlo, unless he really evolves his outside shot and becomes better at that and becomes a better defender as well. But it's going to be hard for him to get those consistent minutes on a night-to-night basis. You could see a lot of DNP CDs next to his name, which also could mean that he's a trade target, and you try to get something back for him. All right, that's going to do it for today. I'm going to send y'all into the weekend with that. You can leave your comments and questions below. I'd be glad to hear from you, and maybe address some of those on Monday. But until the next time, y'all enjoy your Labor Day weekend. Do something, that takes your mind off of some of this nonsense going on around us. But thank you again for being a fan. Thank you for watching the show. Thank you for the positive and the negative criticism that you give, because I just want to do this better every time we step on the mic. So until the next time, this has been the Post Up on Boot Crew Media. I'm David Grubb. You can follow me on social media at DM Grubb, on Twitter, on Instagram. You can find me on Facebook, TikTok, and Blue Sky as well. And don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe button, notification bell, so you don't miss anything on our channel. I'll talk to y'all next week. Have a great weekend.